Welcome to the deep dive. Our topic today, well, it's something I think almost everyone grapples with, right? That really insidious feeling that you're just perpetually behind. You know, whether you're scrolling through Instagram or you see a colleague get that promotion you were hoping for, or maybe it's just watching a family member who seems to have it all figured out. That feeling of like, I'm inferior or I'm stuck. It can be completely paralyzing.
Oh, absolutely. It's exhausting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so demotivating. You're basically measuring your own, messy internal reality against someone else's very polished external highlight reel.
Exactly.
And the sources you've shared with us for this deep dive, they're fascinating. They dive right into the psychology of comparison and this concept called the let them theory. And they do something pretty radical right off the bat.
Which is?
They force us to confront that one really difficult truth we usually try to, avoid.
Which is that life isn't fair, period. Full stop.
That's it. Exactly. And our mission today is really to unpack that. I mean, the source material doesn't mince words. It argues that this chronic, kind of toxic habit of comparison, it's not just a minor annoyance.
Oh.
It's potentially the fundamental source of failure, of paralysis. And the solution they offer, well, that's the core paradox we need to explore today.
Okay.
Which is that letting go of the whole idea of fairness is actually the key, maybe the only key, to getting back your personal power and your motivation.
Oh, okay. That feels deeply counterintuitive. I mean, aren't we sort of hardwired to strive for fairness, to fight for equity? When we feel slighted, our instinct is usually to push back, right? To demand fairness. So why is the advice here to almost surrender to it?
Well, that's the crux of it. The opening thesis in these sources is really simple, and it's pretty unyielding. It says, look, you cannot control another person's success. You can't control their genetic luck. You can't control their timing. It's just not possible. There are only two things, really, that are within your control. First, what lesson can you possibly pull from the example they're setting? And second, what actions are you going to take next? With your own life, with your own cards. When you spend all your energy fighting this cosmic injustice that life isn't fair, you're essentially wasting the very energy you need to actually change the circumstances you can control.
We have to stop being our own obstacle. Okay, let's unpack this properly then. Let's start in section 1 with what you call the necessary non-negotiable bit, accepting unfairness.
Yes, this is really the bedrock, the absolute foundation. Life simply isn't fair. And internally, personally, you have to accept that before you can make any kind of meaningful strategic shift in how you approach things.
Right.
And I think the sources are quite brilliant here because they don't just gloss over it. They don't minimize the real pain of these inequities. They actually validate them first. They lay out this pretty painful, specific inventory of unfairness.
And I really appreciate that validation part because unfairness can feel so vague sometimes, right? But when you look at the actual examples the sources give, you realize just how visceral, how concrete these disparities are.
Absolutely. I mean, think about financial burdens first.
Yeah.
It is objectively unfair that one person is drowning in student debt, maybe working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep up with rising gas prices and rent, while, say, their college roommate lives in an apartment paid for by parents and has a trust fund.
Yeah.
That means they never even had to worry about tuition in the first place. That's a huge structural difference that can feel completely overwhelming.
Or think about the health stuff, the biological realities that honestly no amount of positive thinking or sheer hard work can just erase. It's profoundly unfair to deal with the daily grind of managing lifelong diabetes, for instance. Or maybe developing severe asthma because you happen to grow up near a factory spewing pollution. That wasn't your choice. Or just the sheer brutality of getting an unexpected, aggressive cancer diagnosis that completely throws your life off track.
Devastating.
Those are cards you're dealt that are genuinely, crushingly unfair.
And then there are the sort of everyday social and personal things, the ones that maybe chip away at your confidence more slowly. Like the source mentions the person whose skin is constantly breaking out with acne.
Yeah.
Spending maybe hundreds, thousands on treatments, lotions, dermatologists, and then they look across the room at someone with just effortlessly clear, glowing skin. 0 effort required, seemingly. That feels unfair.
Or the scenario they painted, which I think a lot of people can relate to in some way. You're sitting alone at a bar, you paid for your own drink, and maybe you watch your sister, who just happens to have that supermodel look, the bone structure, the height, and people just flock to her effortlessly all night.
Right.
She has this natural social advantage, this magnetism that feels completely unearned. And, well, in many ways it is unearned. It's genetic luck.
The sources even touch on metabolic differences.
Hmm.
The friend who seems to live on pizza and ice cream but never gains an ounce, while you're meticulously tracking calories and still struggle. That's real. You
Yeah.
can see it in careers too, right?
Yeah.
Consistently getting stuck with the, quote, crappy shift. Or watching a colleague who maybe you feel is less qualified get that promotion you desperately needed, maybe because they knew the right persons or just had better timing.
So, okay, we have this huge list, this inventory of legitimate, real, non-imagined inequities. The immediate human reaction, understandably, is that feeling of, why me? Or this is just impossible. How can I possibly overcome this?
And that feeling is totally understandable. It's almost the default setting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's easy to go there. But here's the critical pivot. This is where the source material really forces a shift in perspective.
Okay.
The core argument is this. Spending your precious time and mental energy just staring at the winning cards in someone else's hand means you are completely missing the chance to play your own hand strategically. It's a massive self-inflicted distraction. It costs you time. It costs you power.
But wait, let me just push back on that for a second. If we just accept the unfairness, if we just say, okay, life's rigged, some people get lucky, oh well, doesn't that risk creating a kind of fatalism? Like, couldn't accepting unfairness lead to apathy, where you just give up because you think, well, the game's fixed anyway, so why even try?
That is the perfect question to ask, because the sources are actually quite careful about this. They draw a line between acceptance and fatalism. The acceptance they're talking about is internal. It's personal.
Okay.
It's the deep realization that, look, you cannot rewind the clock and change your genetics. You can't fight someone else's destiny or their luck. It's about recognizing the fixed points. The moment you stop pouring energy into battling those uncontrollable facts, your height, their trust fund, whatever it is, you actually liberate that energy. And that liberated energy is precisely what you need to fight for the things you can control. Your actions, your choices, even broader social justice issues, if that's your path.
Okay. So it's more about, like, tactical energy management. Accepting I can't change my height frees up the mental bandwidth to actually focus on, say, preparing for that job interview. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly.
And that leads us perfectly into section 2 then, where we really define comparison not just as an emotion, but as this paralyzing mechanism, a form of self-sabotage.
Precisely. If step 1 is accepting that unfairness is a reality, step 2 is realizing that toxic comparison is often the weapon you're unwittingly using against yourself, which actually perpetuates the feeling of being stuck in that unfairness.
Tell us more about this mechanism of stuckness. How does it actually work?
Well, it's insidious, really. Because it takes external data, other people's lives, their achievements, their looks, their resources, and it twists that data into evidence that you are somehow fundamentally flawed.
Right.
You look at their success, and your internal narrative becomes, because they have that and I don't, it must mean I'm a failure, or I must be unattractive, or simply, I'm not good enough. This constant seeking of external validation instantly turns you into your own biggest roadblock.
That's the self-fulfilling prophecy right there, isn't it? The sources describe this cycle so vividly. The mindless scrolling through social media or obsessively checking a competitor's website. It doesn't actually motivate you. It does the exact opposite.
Yeah.
It just makes you feel stuck, hopeless, perpetually behind.
Because, as the sources put it quite bluntly, you are literally torturing yourself for no reason. You're manufacturing your own misery. And that self-inflicted torture, it just drains your motivation dry.
Yeah.
Why would you put in the effort if you've already subconsciously decided the game is rigged against you specifically, that your efforts won't matter?
It's like cognitive dissonance, isn't it? If I deep down believe that only luck or genetics matter, then every time I sit down to actually do the work, part of my brain is whispering, why bother? You don't have X, Y, or Z like they do.
It's exactly right. The comparison habit feeds directly into procrastination. It fuels self-criticism. The sources argue that the chronic habit of comparison becomes the reason for the failing. You end up failing because of the habit, not necessarily because you lack the talent or the resources in the first place.
Wow.
As they say quite starkly, you become the problem.
This really highlights the power drain effect. You spend all this emotional energy, all this mental bandwidth, just wishing you had different cards, wishing you were taller or had clearer skin, or wishing you'd gotten that wedding proposal already, or had more money, or could afford those fancy European vacations you see online. But all that wishing, it doesn't make any of those things magically appear. The only thing it guarantees is that your confidence vanishes right now, in the present moment, where you actually have some agency, some control.
And the sources also insist we have to acknowledge the role of genuine luck. We can't pretend it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Some people are just genuinely lucky. You know, they have friends who seem to have had everything figured out from day one. Maybe they met the love of their life in college and it was easy. Maybe they're naturally super attractive and gifted athletes. And as far as you can see, they don't seem to struggle with the same kind of anxiety or childhood trauma that, let's be honest, many of us do.
It's so easy to look at those people and feel that pang of envy, that corrosive, why them and not me feeling.
Of course. But the key instruction here, according to these sources, is purely tactical. That observation, wow, they seem really lucky. The advice is let them. Acknowledge it, but don't let it become justification for self-pity.
Okay.
It's just a neutral fact. They got lucky in that specific way.
Yeah.
Okay, now what? The sources basically say comparing yourself to someone else's luck is a complete waste of your time and intelligence. Because luck, by its very nature, isn't transferable. It's not repeatable. You can't replicate their starting conditions.
Which brings us really neatly to Section 3, the game of life, and this crucial reframing you mentioned, focusing on your hand. If toxic comparison is the self-sabotage, then reframing the game is the potential cure.
Exactly. The core analogy used here is powerful. It's like poker or any complex card game.
Yeah.
And it completely reframes the whole situation. It stops being a contest against others and becomes a game of managing your own resources.
So let's redefine this game then. The game of life, according to this perspective, isn't played against anyone. It's not some zero-sum tournament where only one person wins.
Right.
It's played with them, sort of simultaneously, but in your own lane. Someone out there will always have better cards than you. That's just a statistical guarantee in a world of billions. But what defines a really skilled player? A master.
Well, a world-class card player knows something fundamental. The hand you're dealt, whether it's amazing like pocket aces or terrible like a 7-2 offsuit in poker that's actually secondary. What truly matters, what defines your success, is how you play the hand you have.
So that's the winning strategy. Winning, and I guess here, winning means reaching your own personal potential, finding fulfillment, not beating someone else winning, requires focusing intently, almost obsessively, on the cards you hold right now.
Yes. Your current resources, your skills, your circumstances, your unique advantages, even your disadvantages can be part of the strategy.
And if you're busy staring across the table, consumed with envy about someone else's royal flush,
You completely miss the opportunity to play your own pair of threes cleverly.
Yeah.
You miss the chance to maximize the potential of your unique situation.
And this is where that let them theory becomes more than just an observation. It becomes a core, tactical instruction, a mental tool.
Exactly. Think of it as an immediate thought-stopping technique. That moment you feel the pang, you see someone achieve something faster, or they have more resources, more support, a luckier break, the mental command you give yourself is simply, let them.
Okay, so practically speaking, I see someone on LinkedIn announce this huge promotion, maybe one I wanted, and I feel that immediate knot of resentment or inadequacy forming.
Instead of trying to suppress that feeling or analyze why they got it and I didn't, I just internally command, let them have that promotion.
Precisely. You acknowledge the external reality, okay, that happened, but you consciously refuse to process it through the filter of your own perceived deficiency. You stop yourself from going down the rabbit hole of, what does this say about me?
Because worrying about it, making yourself feel bad because of their success, the sources call that an insult to your intelligence.
Yes, I love that phrase. It's basically saying you are smarter than this. You are too smart to let external, uncontrollable events dictate your internal sense of worth or potential.
The real secret, then, isn't about ignoring others' success, but shifting how we interpret it. Their success isn't meant to be a mirror reflecting your failures. It's potentially a lesson. It can teach you how to be a better player in your own game.
That's how you win in this context. By achieving your unique potential. You can use their success, maybe parts of it, as a blueprint for action, not as a blueprint for comparison and self-flagellation. Right, because you do possess the ability inherently to figure things out, to work with what you've got, start where you are, and build something meaningful. I mean, history is full of people who achieved incredible things despite being dealt objectively terrible hands, right?
Absolutely. But, and this is the crucial caveat the sources emphasize, you will never, ever tap into that creative, resourceful power if you're constantly leaking energy. If you're giving all your power away to what they call the stupid and toxic habit of comparison,
You have to stop.
you have to stop. You have to hold on to your confidence, protect it fiercely, because you need every ounce of it to play your hand effectively.
Okay, that transition from why them to, okay, what can I maybe learn here? That feels like the real breakthrough. But the sources also acknowledge that comparison is just human nature. It's kind of unavoidable. So how do we tell the difference? How do we distinguish between helpful learning and just falling back into harmful self-sabotage?
Now we get to a really critical distinction. This really shapes the rest of the discussion. This is section 4. Figuring out if your comparison is torture versus teacher.
Right? The sources are clear. Comparing ourselves is normal. It's probably hardwired into us from an evolutionary standpoint, assessing our place in the social hierarchy, looking around, measuring up. That tendency itself isn't the core problem.
Exactly. The problem isn't the impulse to compare. The problem lies in what you choose to do with the information, with the feelings that arise from that comparison.
So this is the pivotal question we need to ask ourselves, the listener needs to ask themselves, right? When you feel that comparison pang, ask, am I torturing myself right now? Or is this comparison actually teaching me something useful, something actionable?
Yes, because if you can correctly identify which mode you're in, you can potentially hit the brakes on the self-sabotage loop almost immediately.
Okay, let's start with type 1 then. Torture comparison. This is where the paralysis, the misery really lives. How do we identify this?
Comparison feels like torture, according to the sources. When you find yourself obsessing over, getting completely caught up in, or just relentlessly beating yourself up about things that you will never be able to change. You're focusing solely, exclusively on the fixed attributes of someone else's life, or your own relative lack thereof.
And the source material gives us a really brilliant, simple test for this, like an immediate litmus test. They call it the 30-second rule.
It's incredibly practical.
Yeah.
Ask yourself, right in that moment of comparison, is there anything I can realistically do in the next 30 seconds to change this specific thing I'm comparing?
Okay.
If the honest answer is no, then it's a fixed attribute. And the instruction is, you must stop torturing yourself about it right now.
Wait, just 30 seconds. That sounds almost too simple. How does a 30-second rule apply to really complex things? Like you mentioned chronic illness earlier, maybe deep-seated poverty. Obviously, you can't fix those in 30 seconds.
That's a great clarification. The 30-second rule isn't about solving the macro problem, like curing the illness or ending poverty in 30 seconds. It's about addressing the internal mental loop of comparing the fixed aspect right now. Okay. So for example, if you're comparing your natural bone structure to a supermodel's, can you change your skeleton in the next 30 seconds? No. That's fixed. Let it go for now.
Right.
If you're comparing your natural singing ability to someone born with perfect pitch, can you acquire perfect pitch in 30 seconds? No. Fixed. Stop the torture loop about that specific attribute. The rule forces a cognitive redirection away from dwelling on the immutable.
So it's about distinguishing fixed attributes, things outside immediate control, versus non-fixed things or potential actions. Like a fixed attribute is comparing my height to LeBron James. It's pointless torture.
Exactly.
But a non-fixed attribute, something that could potentially be addressed, at least initiated in 30 seconds might be, okay, I see a job listing online that looks interesting. In 30 seconds, I can bookmark that page. I can send myself the link. That's an action, not a fixed state.
Precisely. And the fixed attributes list. That's where people apparently spend most of their self-torture time. We're talking about those fundamental biological factors.
Like natural beauty, bone structure, body type.
Yeah.
Things largely determined by genetics. You can change muscle mass with exercise, sure, but you can't change your basic skeletal frame.
Correct. You can't change your height. You can't fundamentally change your metabolism, sure. You can influence it with lifestyle, but there's a strong genetic baseline for most people.
And crucially, you cannot change your family history. You can't pick different parents. You can't change your country of origin or the past experiences, even traumatic ones, that shaped who you are today. Those are non-negotiable facts, cards you were dealt.
And we also have to include those innate, almost God-given talents, as the sources phrase it, things that seem almost effortless for some people. Exceptional athletic ability that goes beyond just training. Perfect musical pitch, maybe that genius-level brain power or a photographic memory, natural artistic talent that seems to flow without formal training, or that uncanny ability some people have to just pick up languages instantly.
Right. These are things they were essentially born with. They might still work hard, but they have a massive head start, a foundational talent that someone else might work decades for and never quite achieve in the same way.
They were dealt those specific ace cards. And no amount of wishing, supplements, courses, or sheer willpower on your part is going to magically make those specific fixed attributes appear in your life.
So the conclusion is pretty stark, isn't it? Anytime you spend mentally obsessing, comparing, agonizing over a fixed aspect of someone else's life versus your own.
It is purely an act of self-torture. That's the framing. It's completely useless for your personal growth, and it's actively detrimental to your happiness and well-being right now, if you can't do anything about it in the next 30 seconds.
You have to learn to allow it. You have to practice. Let them have their height, let them have their perfect pitch, let them have their family connections, and then crucially, turn your focus back inward to your hand.
Exactly.
Okay, to make this crystal clear, let's move into section 5. Because the source material gives us a really powerful, specific story that illustrates this destructive spiral perfectly. It's the case study of the two sisters, Sawyer and Kendall.
Yes, this anecdote is so effective because it shows how these comparisons often happen within our closest relationships, making them even more potent. So, Sawyer is the older sister, and she develops this intense hyperfixation on her younger sister, Kendall.
And Kendall just happened to win the genetic lottery in a few key areas.
Right, according to Sawyer's perception at least. Kendall has a completely different body type, maybe that enviable bone structure we talked about, and apparently a blazing fast metabolism where she can eat anything.
Okay, classic comparison fodder right there.
But it doesn't stop at the physical. Kendall was also apparently blessed with these amazing fixed talents, specifically a naturally beautiful, powerful singing voice and perfect pitch. Sawyer, meanwhile, struggles with her weight, feels self-conscious about her body, and has what she considers an average singing voice.
So Sawyer starts doing that thing we talked about, keeping score.
Exactly. She creates this relentless internal scorecard, and based solely on these fixed genetic attributes, looks, metabolism, singing talent, she concludes. Kendall is winning, and I, Sawyer, am losing. And this makes her utterly miserable. She starts hating her own body, constantly complaining about her metabolism, fixating on how effortless it seems for Kendall compared to how hard it is for her. And the thing is, her observation might even be factually correct. It is perhaps unfair in a cosmic sense.
But the realization that comes with applying this let them or 30-second rule thinking is...
It's that no amount of dieting or supplements or expensive singing lessons or grueling exercise routines will ever truly even the score on those specific fixed genetic attributes. Sawyer is essentially trying to solve a genetic lottery problem with behavioral changes.
And it's just setting herself up for failure and destroying her confidence in the process.
Precisely. It's a perfect illustration of what psychologists call upward comparison. That's the technical term for measuring yourself against people or attributes you perceive as better than you, especially in areas where you already feel lacking.
And the research cited in the sources says this type of comparison is actively harmful.
Unambiguously, yes. It actively and often rapidly destroys self-esteem. It erodes your sense of internal validation because you're constantly looking outside for proof of your worth and comparing against things you can't attain.
And there's a fascinating link here to a deeper psychological issue. The sources bring up something called the control trap.
Yes, this is really insightful. The idea is that many modern struggles, particularly things like anxiety disorders, obsessive-compulsive tendencies, even eating disorders, can stem from an underlying, often obsessive need for control. Control over one's life, one's body, one's destiny.
Okay.
So when Sawyer tries to exert control over things, she fundamentally cannot control her sister's genetics. Random fate, her own basic bone structure, the luck of the draw, it backfires. It triggers the control trap.
How so?
Instead of feeling more in control, she ends up feeling increasingly powerless because she's pouring all her energy into fighting unwinnable battles against fixed realities. And by focusing so intensely on controlling the external fixed stuff, she actually loses control over the things she could influence.
Like her own choices, her attitude, setting achievable goals based on her own strengths.
Exactly, her own happiness. And the sources don't shy away from the potential dark side here. The consequences they stress are serious. This kind of torturous comparison, especially when it becomes chronic, isn't just making you feel a bit down. It can contribute directly to really profound struggles.
Like eating disorders, driven by that impossible desire to change an unchangeable body type.
Yes, or generalized mental health problems, chronic anxiety, maybe even addiction as a coping mechanism, and just this pervasive, paralyzing sense of shame. People can functionally sabotage their entire lives because they get locked into this cycle of comparing their internal reality to someone else's external, often fixed attributes.
So the call to action for Sawyer, and really for anyone listening who recognizes themselves in this pattern, is pretty urgent then.
It really is. Stop obsessing over the cards in someone else's hand, especially the ones you can never have. As long as Sawyer, for example, focuses solely on what she is not, I'm not thin like Kendall, I'm not a great singer like Kendall, she is literally blinding herself
Blinding herself to what?
to the magnificence of her own unique talents. Maybe she has an incredible analytical brain or amazing loyalty as a friend or untapped potential in a different kind of sport or art form. Until she stops the self-torture over the fixed things, she cannot possibly see or embrace the beautiful, unique life that is available to her based on her cards.
That distinction is so key. Accepting where you are, who you are fundamentally, and then focusing on what you can do starting now. That seems to be the path out.
It is.
We've established pretty clearly how comparison becomes paralyzing torture when it fixates on these unchangeable, fixed attributes. But to really ground this whole psychological discussion, the sources suggest we need to introduce one more perspective, kind of the missing piece. Which brings us to section 6, downward comparison.
Yes, this is a really important piece of context setting. The observation is that people almost exclusively engage in upward comparison. We're constantly looking up at those we perceive as better off, richer, luckier, more successful, more beautiful, whatever it is.
Right.
But we very rarely consciously engage in downward comparison, which means taking a moment to look around, or look down metaphorically, and acknowledge how much better off we might be compared to the vast majority of people on the planet.
And it's important to stress, right, this isn't intended as a guilt trip. It's not meant to diminish anyone's real struggles by saying, someone else has it worse, so stop complaining.
No, absolutely not. It's intended purely as a reality check. A way to put the obsessive self-torture, especially over perhaps relatively minor first-world problems, into a broader context. When you're feeling paralyzed by the perceived unfairness of your student loan debt, for example,
Yeah.
it can be helpful not to dismiss the debt, which is real, but to remember that your situation, however difficult, still operates from a foundation of immense privilege compared to the literal daily survival struggles faced by a huge portion of the global population.
And the sources provide a really stark statistic to hammer this point home.
They do. According to the United Nations, roughly 1 in 4 people on Earth do not have reliable access to safe, clean drinking water.
Wow. 1 in 4.
Just sit with that for a second.
Yeah.
Think about the fundamental daily challenge that represents, the sheer effort and risk involved in just getting water to survive.
It definitely provides us a sobering moment of context. I mean, if you, the listener, have access to clean running water right now, if you have electricity, reliable shelter, enough food, and importantly, the safety, the time, and the mental capacity to even engage with a deep dive like this,
Then statistically speaking, you are doing significantly better than the majority of human beings currently alive on this planet.
again, not to minimize personal pain, but to frame the self-torture aspect.
Exactly. It doesn't magically make the debt disappear or cure the chronic illness, but it powerfully reinforces that core thesis. Engaging in self-torture over perceived unfairness is ultimately a choice you're making with your mental energy, regardless of your circumstances.
The energy you spend agonizing over why your sister got the good metabolism card is energy you are actively withholding from seizing an opportunity, learning a skill, or taking an action that could actually change your controllable future.
And that really leads to the ultimate imperative that comes out of all this source material. You are simply too intelligent, too capable, too resourceful to waste your precious mental power and your limited time on this earth torturing yourself over fixed attributes you cannot change.
The whole point of the let them philosophy, the 30-second rule, the focus on your own hand, it's all designed to help you hold on to that power, protect that cognitive energy.
Because you desperately need it. You need it to unlock your potential, to play your game, to build your unique, fulfilling life, the one that isn't dependent on Kendall's bone structure or your friend's inherited trust fund.
Okay, so let's try and synthesize this as we wrap up. The central message, the core mandate from this deep dive seems to be, first, learn to recognize when your comparison has tipped into torture. Is it focused on fixed attributes? Can you change it in 30 seconds? If not,
Then, consciously, deliberately choose to stop. Disengage from that specific loop. Practice let them. And crucially, hold on to your power. Reclaim that mental energy.
because that energy is the fuel. It's what you need to unlock your own unique life potential, the one that's waiting for you beyond the comparison trap.
And perhaps the final, most beautiful truth embedded in this is that finding more happiness, more contentment, requires allowing yourself to be happier, giving yourself permission.
You can't do both simultaneously, can you?
Exactly. It is functionally, psychologically impossible to genuinely enjoy your life, to appreciate your own strengths, to love yourself while you are simultaneously beating yourself up with torturous, upward fixed attribute comparison. You have to quit keeping that mental scorecard of misery.
We've focused heavily today, and rightly so, on unpacking the paralyzing nature of type 1 comparison, the torture type, identifying it, understanding its roots, and the imperative to stop it.
Yes. But the source material leaves us hanging with a really significant and actually quite empowering provocation for the future. Well, if the goal is self-growth, action, and happiness,
Fine.
and if comparison, as we've acknowledged, is almost unavoidable human nature, then we can't just stop at identifying the torture. We have to actively pivot towards the other type of comparison.
The teacher type.
Exactly, the type the sources intriguingly call a goldmine.
Okay, so we'll leave you, the listener, with this final, really powerful thought to mull over. If comparison can be a teacher instead of just a torturer, how do we actually leverage that? How do we use that gold mine of observing others not to feel bad, but to actively drive our own motivation and action?
What are the key elements of someone else's success? Not their height, not their metabolism, not their luck, but perhaps their actions, their discipline, their strategies, their persistence, their habits. What are the things that can potentially be learned, adapted, changed, or applied to playing your own hand better?
Because that is where the real power to play your game lies. And that sounds like a fascinating topic for a future deep dive.